Hello and welcome to the Pi Crowdcast with our typical technical difficulties because of the load that Crowdcast is under. I'm Rick Turoczy. I'm the co-founder and general manager of Pi. Thanks for joining us. Our guest today is Malia Spencer from the Portland Business Journal. Hey, Malia.
Hello.
Thanks for coming. It's great to have you here, and we're really excited to get into this conversation. If it's your first time on Crowdcast, there's chat over there. I already see a bunch of you mucking around in chat. Feel free to talk with one another or contact me. If you're having technical difficulties or anything like that, let me know and I'll do my best to help you out. If you have questions, however, instead of posting them to chat, look to the bottom of the screen and there's an Ask a Question button that's got a highlighted 10 by it right now. And you can pop in there, post your question. The beauty of using that functionality is that if somebody likes your question, they can upvote it. So we can kind of focus on the stuff that's most important to you in terms of what you want Malia to be talking about and what we focus on. So again, thanks for coming. Malia, maybe just give us a little bit on your bio, your context, your life as a journalist, please.
All right. So I've been in Portland now for 6 years, I believe. Feels like forever, though. I've been bugging everybody for a long time. So I've been here for 6 years. I've actually been with our company, American City Business Journals, for 10 years. Yeah, 10. I started in Pittsburgh at our Pittsburgh paper covering technology and manufacturing, which was really interesting. I grew up in California, actually, in the Bay Area, and so there wasn't a whole lot of sort of old line manufacturing going on. So it was really interesting to, see steel mills everywhere and chemical plants and stuff, because I just never saw much of that where I was. So I got into covering technology while I was out there. I didn't realize that CMU was based in Pittsburgh until I got there. Because
Carnegie Mellon
Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in Silicon Valley, so I was like, that's where technology is.
Yeah, Stanford and all that stuff. Yeah.
I went to an engineering school in San Luis Obispo. I was like, I know, everything's on the West Coast. I assumed CMU was in New York. I don't know. So I got to Pittsburgh, realized, there's tons of stuff going on, and it was really interesting. And I learned about their startup community and kind of venture investing and just the whole startup thing. And so this was in 2009, and I really got into it. And so I wanted to cover it more. I wanted to get back to the West Coast. And so I ended up here in Pittsburgh, or in Portland from Pittsburgh. And it's pretty much felt like home. And so I ended up staying and covering the tech. And I sort of broadened my beat a little bit. So I cover tech and startups technically. And then also what I say is like entrepreneurs, because I'll also write about food companies or product companies. A lot of stuff as it's just getting started, maybe. Once it gets big enough, it might go over to one of our other reporters who covers that industry. But, especially in like apparel, everything with our apparel reporters coverage, footwear and apparel is, the oxygen is all taken up by Nike. And so I can sometimes write about some of the smaller things, and then he'll pick things up. Or we're a pretty collaborative newsroom, so we also just kind of all work together.
That's awesome.
But that's kind of the realm of stuff that I look at. So it's a pretty broad definition of startup, is what I tell people. So
well, and I think there's people kind of conflate the startup versus entrepreneur kind of thing often, and I tend to focus on startups, but recognize there are a whole bunch of other people who are entrepreneurial and doing things that are of interest. It's just not in my realm. What drew you to journalism in the first place?
I'm really nosy. I mean, honestly, I'm super nosy, and I want to know what's going on, and I like talking to people. And when you're a reporter, you get to ask people all kinds of questions you can't ask them normally. And so that's always fun. But I knew from an early age, like when I was real little, like I wanted to be on TV news is what I wanted to do initially. And then I started watching it more once I got into it, because I grew up watching the Bay Area news market was pretty good. But then I went to school in San Luis Obispo, which is closer to Los Angeles. And then I saw the LA market and I was like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. And so I decided to stick with newspapers because I was the kid. I did my high school newspaper. I was an editor, and then I did my college paper. And so I just decided, you know what, I don't want to give that up. And I initially thought I was going to be a political reporter. Like my dream job coming out of college was to be in the Sacramento bureau for one of the major papers in California, or the AP, covering state politics. Thinking about that now, I'm like, oh God, that sounds like torture. Because I don't think I could handle the divisiveness and the horse race aspect of everything. And there's no nuance, and there's no actual discussions about things. And so I ended up getting into covering business because of the Great Recession. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And these are people's stories. These are super important stories that I don't think at the time necessarily were getting the coverage that they needed. And so I got into that. But
yeah, it's interesting to hear that you were inspired by some of the political stuff, because I think in my outside view of journalism, there tend to be kind of a few kind of archetypes of journalists, and some of them are very much like pushing for the justice angle or the kind of social angle, and others are more focused on the telling the stories of people. And what I've always really appreciated about your work is the people are always there. Like you have a very distinct business focus, and you do a really good job of covering the business aspects of things, but the personal thing is always there and tangible for me as a reader of your work. Maybe talk a little bit about this series you've been following with the founders going through the pandemic.
Yeah, that is something that as this whole thing was starting to happen, and we saw that this is really going to be the major news story for a generation. This is a huge story, and how are we telling this? And I sit next to our footwear and apparel reporter, Matt Kish, who also covers banking. So the two of us sit next to each other, and we were just talking about, wow, this is going to wipe out companies. Companies are going to be gone that were here, that people loved, and things that people have built over the years are going to be gone. And so we immediately were just going through the entrepreneurs that we've just covered a lot, being like, oh my God, what are they going to do? This is going to hugely affect them. And so we started talking about, what can we do to capture this moment, to sort of show what is happening for business owners? Because I think that's a very specific impact. I mean, obviously there's all the public health stuff, and our healthcare reporter has been doing a great job with that. And so we kind of thought about it. We're like, well, maybe let's follow some people just to see what's happening to them. So we started this at the end of February, I think, or maybe the first week of March. We've done 4 of them. And we did the first one as a cover story, and we just talked to 7 entrepreneurs about basically just their immediate reaction. When did they first start to hear this was a problem? What was their, when did they first see it being an issue? And so I've been talking with Jason Bolt from Revent and Keith Lee from Chin's Import Export. We've also been talking with Emma McElroy and Lynn Lee and Ian Williams. And I mean, they've been heartbreaking stories. I mean, it's the first one we did, we put it together, and all of us, once we saw them all together and we read them one after the other, and we did it as in their own words. I mean, we were all just heartbroken for it too. Cause I mean, we've been following all of these people for so long. And so we've been really focused on that. And so then we're like, well, we've introduced these people, we got to continue this. And so it's been like, we were checking in weekly with them to see like what happened this week, what happened with sales, how are you pivoting? Have you applied for loans? Did you get loans? And we've got 7 people. Let's see. I know the Portland clinic. I think it's the Portland clinic or the Oregon clinic. One of them is one that we're following. And I know they got some of the healthcare money. But of the other folks we were following, one of them got a PPP loan, as far as I can tell. I don't know from the second round, because I know a couple people had their applications in, but it had run out of money. But we thought that was really telling that, nobody's getting this money. And so we're going to continue to follow them. We have a big story coming out at the end of May. It'll be, I think it's Memorial Day weekend, because our parent company actually saw what we were doing and thought it was a really good way to kind of cover this. And so we're actually doing a big national package. So every paper in our chain, there's 43 of them, are doing the same thing. And so I think there's going to be a really powerful national package that really shows how this is impacting small businesses across the country.
That's awesome. And great that you inspired some of that activity in the network from folks, for sure. I think one of the questions that I wanted to ask before we get into the community questions, and I hope you'll appreciate this context. Like, I find so often with startups, founders, they have a lot of misconceptions about other professional roles in the ecosystem, right? So they think it's a VC's job to write checks. And if they're not writing checks, then they're not doing their job. They think it's a journalist's job to write up every product launch they ever release. And maybe talk a little bit about, in terms of context, like what gets you excited about a story? What makes you motivated to kind of start chasing a topic? Like, what can people be doing more effectively to communicate not only something that could benefit them, but that actually benefits you as a journalist to help you do your job?
Well, the first thing is just kind of understanding, and at least for us at the Business Journal, is really understanding what it is that we do and what our product is. So we're different than a more consumer publication like the O or Willamette Week or something like that, which is for a broader audience. Our audience is specifically business owners, company executives, managers who want to move up in their career, people who are starting companies and they're looking for advice or whatever. It's the Business Journal is a tool, and it's a tool to help you, grow your company, help your career, that kind of stuff. So we're writing stories based on sort of that business intelligence that we're giving our readers. Like, our readers want to know what's going on in the community. They want to know who's hiring. They want to know who's laying people off. They want to know who's moving. They want to know if some big company is coming to town and is going to start poaching their employees. They want to know, like, if they're in real estate, is this company getting bigger? Oh, should I call them? Maybe they need office furniture. Who knows? And so people are reading us to figure out different kinds of partnerships they can do, potential customers, things like that. And so understanding that, like, my job isn't to do your PR. It's to help our readers with those specific things they're trying to do. So, if you've got an interesting product that's coming out or whatever, but it's going to be this huge thing for your bottom line, and which is going to allow you to hire more people or move into a bigger office or whatever, that's the context we're going to be writing about that. Or, if you're a company that's had one specific product for a long time and you've had a lot of success and now you're branching off into something wholly new, that's something we're going to be interested in, Or like the story I did the other day on Milk Run was, there's all this stuff going on with this pandemic and, grocery stores are empty and I've heard her pitch a few times, and I know it's this whole education on buying local and local farmers and the local supply chain. So that was something where I contacted, I was like, what's going on with you guys? And then we did this story about the insane growth they've seen, and she's fine, like the value proposition she's been preaching is finally like people see it now.
Yep.
And so that's kind of how that comes about. Or like today there was a story on Stream, and their new parent company is giving away their technology for free to certain businesses, real estate agents, and like some different home pros. And so that was something that is going to be useful for a real estate agent to see that, oh, my real estate firm is one of these people that they're partnering with, so I should figure out how I can do this. So that's kind of how we look at it. And so if you want your stuff in a certain publication, it's just like looking for an investor. You got to find the right reporter, the right publication, make sure you're pitching it to the right person. Just really understanding what that person covers is gonna be super helpful. And you might, get a phone call or an email looking for more information because you've gone to the right person. I get so many pitches for stuff that is things we don't cover, like stuff we don't cover, and so.
Well, I can't imagine what you go. I mean, I run a poorly written blog and get pitched on stuff all the time. I can't imagine what somebody who's actually a journalist gets pitched on a regular basis. So thanks for putting up with that, and hopefully this will help people pitch you a little better.
And I mean, we have a small newsroom, and so if you come to me and it's like a cannabis startup or a healthcare startup, I'll look at it, and if it's something that's in my wheelhouse, I might do it. But I also might pass it off to our reporters that do cover that, and that's totally fine to do, because like if you know that this is what I cover, I'll look at it. But we're super collaborative, and we hand things off all the time. And like things like cannabis, it's so regulated, and I don't know the regulations, and so I might hand it off to Pete, our reporter that covers that, or ask him to sit in on an interview or something like that, because he might see a story there that I won't see. So.
Yep. Also, if there was ever a reporter designed to cover cannabis, it's somebody named Pete Danko.
Yes.
Just, I mean, come on, like that's magic.
Yeah. He is the fun beat of he covers energy, cannabis, and wine. So
Oh yeah. Well, some people luck out on those beats. Some people have to deal with us annoying startups. So thank you for doing that.
No, it's like working in the toy department, because it's constantly people are doing neat things, and I also can use it as an excuse not to have to dress as nicely. I'm like, I can't wear a suit. If I show up in a suit, nobody's gonna talk to me. So
I'm not authentic in that vibe. Yeah,
exactly.
All right, let's get into some of the questions that people have been submitting. The first one: can you outline the best way to approach reporters when you want to get an article written about your company or product? Taking into consideration, we are looking to get our story out there, yet you have responsibility to bring an appropriate story forward. And full disclosure, we're looking to get some articles written.
Nice. Well, like I said, so it's mostly know your audience, like know who you're pitching.
Yep.
If you have something, I mean, you can always send an email. Like I do look at all my emails. So I can kind of figure out whether or not, because sometimes something might not be a story right now, but it might be a story 2 months from now. Like I said, like with Milk Run, I've known about her. We've written about her a couple times in sort of tangential ways. But it wasn't until this week that I, was able to get on the phone with her, and we talked about a bunch of stuff. And so it might not be immediate, but it can still happen. Because I know we do lots of projects and things, and the Business Journal we also do a lot of awards and special publications and stuff. And so that's another way that people can get their name out there and to get in the paper. We've got like our fastest growing companies list. I know a lot of young companies get on that list because you can get really high on that list because it's percentage growth. So if you're a 5-year-old company and you've been grown a lot, like that could get you up pretty high. And so there's a publication and a big event that always happens with that. We've got our Small Business Innovation Awards, which is another one where It's got a publication attached to it. We've got 40 under 40. So there's lots of different ways to get into the paper, even if it isn't necessarily a story about your product launch or something. If you've got an interesting strategy that you've used to get your item on Target shelves across the country or something like that, that's something we'd be interested in, because it's a strategy that other entrepreneurs can use maybe in their own businesses. So that's another kind of way to spin it as well.
And on the awards and events and those kind of things, those are more kind of application driven processing.
A lot of those
right?
are application driven. We have a section in our website for nominations. I know a lot of like lawyers and accountants and stuff like that will do it for clients and things. But you can always do it for yourself. We also have tons of lists. And so we're always looking for businesses to be on the lists, because, we don't know everybody. And so I know like we've been building out, I think, an LGBTQ owned businesses list, our minority and women owned businesses lists. And so there's just different ways to kind of get on those lists and kind of be on the radar. Because the other thing we do with those is like, we'll send out surveys sometimes if we're doing like a big project or something, or like right now, we've been sending out surveys to people who are on our lists, asking them, how are you surviving COVID-19? Like what's going on with your business? And so that's a way, like we'll get those answers and stuff, and somebody will go through it, and like we'll find people through that. So that's another aspect.
Cool. Thank you. Next question. You have covered diversity in tech over the last couple of years. From your perspective, how are we doing as a community?
So I've been here now for 6 years, so it's a little bit removed from how I could compare it to like Pittsburgh, where I was before. There's definitely, it's such a mixed bag, because it feels like people want to be better. And I know Stephen Green talks about this all the time about, people talk about a lot of things, but, is anything actually happening? And we can see with the like diversity pledge and things like that the community has done, that the needle isn't really moving. It's moving a little bit for women, but not really for anybody else. So there's definitely work to be done, I think. I'm going to be watching to see what happens now that we're in, potentially a terrible recession at best. What happens to all of this work? I mean, there have been there've been some incremental improvements. There's been at least some recognition that this is a problem. How does that kind of get through this? What happens to all these DE and diversity, equity, and inclusion jobs that have started to pop up? What happens to those now? Are they still going to be a focus?
Right. And we talked about, actually, we hit on this topic this morning, talking with Kate Earp, and the concern was, have DE and I efforts been a nice to have for companies in an up economy, or are they actually something that's a priority for folks? And I think that's a question that it remains to be seen.
I think that'll also sort of show a little bit, that sort of also answers the question of how are we doing? If those jobs and those programs survive this, then maybe we're doing slightly better. But again, the numbers haven't borne it out yet after watching them for a while. So it's obviously still something to work on.
Yep. This kind of touches on the milk run topic, but kind of diving a little deeper. Given the overwhelming economic hardships facing businesses because of COVID-19, how are you triaging stories of hope, success with those of struggle?
It's we're definitely we're definitely covering both, and so we want to be able to, so we have a feature in the paper each week called Strategies that basically looks at a business strategy. And up until now, it had always been, here's this thing that this company did to grow X amount, and here's the success they've had, or here's this thing they did so that they could, get the executives they were trying to hire to come on board, stuff like that. we've sort of shifted that a little bit in this new environment to be, okay, here is what this company is doing to survive. Here's this pivot that they've done so that they can continue to operate. I know we did, let's see, I think this week's is about, it's just posted online. It's about a grocery store in Foster Powell. I think it's Bread and Roses, maybe. Just talking about like what he's been doing to try and keep up and to be this community asset out there. And so we're looking at sort of all of those stories. We're really trying to help our readers get new ideas of what they can be doing and how to think creatively. And so, maybe if reading about what another company is doing can help get them thinking, oh, I could do that in my business, sort of thing, I think is something that at least I'm putting a priority on, to try and because we want to be this resource.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your earlier point, the milk run story was a great example that it's, being as close to that company and as I am, that they had been kind of banging their head against a wall trying to educate the market about why their solution was needed. And a situation like this just illuminates why the food supply chain can't be a single point of failure kind of thing. So,
well, and it's one of those, whose quote is it? Something about where success is about luck and preparation for when the timing hits you.
Mm-hmm.
I butchered that quote, but that seems to be, there's a lot of companies that are starting to surface where we're seeing that, they had the preparation to be able to just run when the community needed them or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Here's one. COVID-19 is wiping out businesses across the country. What stories are you looking to cover in the next couple months in that regard, either from a Portland perspective or from a broader business journal perspective?
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, just the ways that companies are trying to survive all of this. Companies and then also other organizations too. I mean, this week's cover story is looking at what nonprofits in town are doing because there's going to be huge need coming up with those organizations. I mean, they're going to have trouble with their own fundraising, but then they're seeing huge influx of people who need services. I had a conversation a few weeks ago with Sherry Dunn from Dress for Success Oregon. And they're an organization that everybody knows them for giving out the business suits, but they do so much more. They've got all kinds of sort of pre-employment and post-employment and just help to get people back into the workforce. And there's a lot of people now who need to navigate the system who have never had to do that before. And so organizations like Dress are trying to figure out how to help all of those people that are going to come knocking at their door. So we're obviously looking at those sorts of stories. We're looking at the data's not out there yet, but to see who got the PPP loans, what were the demographics of it? Because we've at the Business Journal been covering the fact that SBA lending to women and minority businesses has fallen off a cliff in the last 10 years. And so it was already bad and I can't imagine it gets better. So we are looking at those sorts of things. So we'll be looking for that data to come out, which hasn't yet. And so kind of looking to see what comes next, how do people start going back to work? What do shared spaces look like? And what, when we come out of this, what did we learn, in order to maybe not have to go through something like this again, or at least be better prepared for the next time. So those sorts of things.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's the most interesting part from my perspective is in my own professional experience, going through the dot-com boom and bust, followed by 9/11, followed by the mortgage crisis, those were fairly rapid succession. And for a lot of folks, this has been a 10 to 12 year upswing and they've never experienced this before. So there's not that resiliency built in, or there's not that kind of prior knowledge of how to weather these kind of downturns, because it's always been up and to the right for folks.
Well, I ended up in business reporting because I decided to go back to grad school, and I started grad school in September of 2008, having not researched much, and quit a job, went back to school, got into a mountain of debt, just for the economy to go off a cliff. And I was like, oh shit. So that's how I started getting into learning how to be a business reporter, because I was in grad school and I was like, what the hell is going on? And so I started taking the business classes because I had no idea what was happening. So
yeah, it's that classic just follow the money kind of thing. Like if you understand how the systems work and you follow the money, then that's where the stories really are, for sure. Speaking of stories, this may be a hard one. I know we were talking about it in the green room, but what's the best story or subject you've covered? And or what's the worst? Besides pie. Like you can say pie is the worst. That's fine.
I don't think there's necessarily like a worst story. I mean, there's definitely, it's working with reporters and stuff. It's just like any other working relationship. If you're difficult, you might not be high on the call list when someone's looking for sources. So, that's a thing. But I don't think there's any worst things. There's been a lot of so the thing I like about my job is I learn something new constantly, which is super fun. And so, like I said, when I was in Pittsburgh and doing a lot of the industrial, like manufacturing stuff, that was really cool. Like I got to tour a steel mill. I went in a coal mine, all kinds of stuff. So that was fun. I covered a bunch of, Obama came to Pittsburgh a bunch when I was there. And so that was really cool because the first time he came to Pittsburgh was neat because I had never covered a presidential anything. So, I got my White House press badge and stuff like that to go, and that was cool. I did once I got to Oregon, I did a tour of a clean room out on Semiconductor. That was neat. Yeah. And to wear the bunny suit.
Bunny suit? Yeah, nice.
The entire time I was in there, I was like, don't sneeze, don't sneeze, don't sneeze. Because I was like, I don't want to be the one that ruins this whole batch of whatever. And so
that's done. Just throw it away.
Exactly. Yeah. It was intense. There was the whole bunny suit thing. They gave me a notebook, with special paper, some kind of paper that doesn't slough off. And then I think they also gave me a pen. I couldn't bring anything in there. It was crazy. So that was fun.
That's awesome.
Yes, big tours are always cool.
Yeah. This is a good one. What are some of the mistakes you see or hear people make often when talking to you for a story? So basically, from a pitch perspective, what are the biggest gaffes or mistakes that people regularly make?
Part of it is just understanding, kind of my perspective is I have readers and kind of what our readers are looking for. I wouldn't say there's huge mistakes because I know when I'm talking to a lot of people, especially when I'm talking to startups, they don't have media training. And so I know that. So there's not really something you could do that I'm like, oh my God, that was terrible. Because I know, I had a journalism professor at one point tell us that, most people don't get in the newspaper. The only time they're in the newspaper is their obituary. And so people don't know how to talk to reporters and they get nervous. And so I know that. And that's fine. If you work for a big company and I know you've had media training, then, I'm going to have different expectations as to what you should and shouldn't know about how this all works. But I don't know how other media work, but I know how all the places I've ever worked, including the Business Journal, we will not give you a story ahead of time to proof. That's just not something that happens. I'm always shocked how many times people that work for big companies ask me that. And I was like, would you ask the Wall Street Journal to show you their story? Because I hope they say no. So that's, I think, kind of the biggest thing is that we're not going to we're not going to do that. Sometimes I'll tell people I'll fact check with them if they're super nervous about something that was really complicated. But for the most part, don't ask.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, one of the situations that I always try and remind startups is, so like there's this thing for hackathons when like people are organizing hackathons, like my advice is if you could write an RFP to pay somebody to build what you want built, then that's not a hackathon. Like go pay somebody to build that. And so kind of tangentially with startups, if you could pay to buy an advertisement in a paper that said what you wanted it to say, then that's not a story. Right. Like it's got to have some depth to it that is beyond just self-promotional kind of activity. So are there tips for folks? Like, do you like it if they come to you with, here's kind of the market and other people playing in the market, or like how do you like a pitch composed?
Usually, if founders just, email and say, hey, I'm working on this company and this is what we're doing and this is the market we're in, like that's probably enough to at least to get me interested, to talk more about like, what kind of traction are you seeing, or what kind of customer account do you have, and that sort of stuff. We do have something in the paper. I haven't done one recently just because things have been so weird, called The Pitch, which is essentially a written investor pitch, which usually we have a questionnaire that we use for that one, and I'll just send that out and then read that over. When it's time to do something, I'll call the entrepreneur, we'll talk a little bit, and then that interview is how I write the intro. So it's usually like the origin story of like why you decided to make whatever it is you're making. And then it just goes into, what you do, why it's different, who's your competition, how much money are you raising, who are your advisors, that kind of stuff. So we do have that. And we're always looking for companies for that. Because things have been so weird, we haven't had that in the paper recently, because we're trying to figure out also trying to read the room. So trying to figure out when to bring that back in. We also, we do have a section in on our website. It's self-serve. So I will sometimes send links to people, which is basically you pay us and we will run your press release in this section of the website. I think it's called like Biz Spotlight or something like that. And that's something that our product team runs that. And so that's also something you can do if you want to do that. So we will take your money.
You can.
They will on product. I can't, but they can.
Yeah. You can't even take the RevNat sponsorship either. But speaking of RevNats. So I think another misconception about your industry is that it's all kind of this inbound slog, when in reality, a lot of your work is just kind of paying attention to the market and identifying potential stories. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how you do that kind of research work, or where you find news that might not be proactively coming your way?
Yeah, well, before all of this, it was going to stuff. I would be, be at all the events and the pitch competitions and things like that. Because again, like even if we weren't necessarily going to write a story, I'd still go to the pitch events and hear what people are working on, just to start to see like who's kind of coming up with the next things. I read a lot. I'm on Twitter too much. I read.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. I read the Axios newsletters, the Dan Premack one, the tech one that Ina does. And like Term Sheet for Fortune, those different newsletters. I'm reading those most days. And then I also I'm in the PDX startup Slack, so I'm in there. I don't talk too much, but I'm kind of in there seeing just what people are talking about. I know I got in touch with somebody on there through and talked to the folks at Gold Star events. Like I didn't realize, I had kind of heard of them, but I didn't really know what they did or anything like that. But they had just an interesting thing they were trying to do to keep their engineers working. And so I talked to their CEO. They're one of those companies that not based here, but they have like 40 people here. So, so we do cover those sorts of the different outposts and stuff like that as well.
Yep.
So basically, it's just paying attention.
Yeah. Just being present helps.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, next question. We had a reporter reach out to us. I provided information about the company, including relevant COVID-19 positioning. He responded asking me to identify the hook for him. Is this normal? I took it as he wasn't interested in covering us at the time. Like, is that one of those like VC quips of like, get back to us when you have more traction? Like, are there...
Potentially. I mean, I can only speak for how I operate.
Sure.
Like, that's not probably something I would do. So, I mean, if I was reaching out to people looking for information, it's probably because I already have some sort of a topic I want to write in mind already. Like, I'm coming to you because I'm looking at X trend and your company is in that trend, sort of thing. But, or somebody has mentioned your company to me. Like, that's the other thing. Like, the other day I wrote about Qualtic, and they had hired somebody. They hired Steve Barham, who was at 7 Peak. He was at LinkedIn, then he was at 7 Peaks. And so he's just been in the community. So I figured, people are going to care where he's landed now. But at the same time, Qualtic had come up to me like 3 or 4 times. Different investors in town had mentioned them to me. And it had been like on my list of companies to look into, and I just never got to it. And so that them hiring somebody who was super well known was enough of a hook for me to be like, okay, they hired this person, and then here's who this company is, kind of story. So I feel like, I don't know, asking the company to come up with the hook is a little weird, but I can't speak for anybody else.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that one. Being someone who writes on a regular basis, I would prefer to come up with the hook.
Yeah, and you know, I get a lot of emails, and like I like getting emails from, you know, the CEO, the founder, because I like to make that connection, because, you know, as companies grow, it's just easy to be able to shoot an email over and be like, hey, I heard this thing, or you guys are in this space, and I think this story I'm working on, you could comment on it. You know, it's just easier to have that connection already. And so, I mean, it's all relationship building, which I know all of us at the PBJ do. So, you know, even if it's not a story, but just, you know, having a company on our radar, or a founder, or somebody who has some sort of an expertise is helpful.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that touches on a very important point, which is it's okay to communicate with you even if you don't have a story, which is like, you can be a human and communicate and like share what's going on and that kind of thing, even without ulterior motives of getting something.
Or even like if you're just seeing some sort of an interesting trend that you think other people might be interested in too, I mean, just drop a note, because that stuff is helpful.
Yep. Question that just your discussion kind of sparked another question for me. You know, as a professional journalist in this day and age, like, do you feel competitive for like exclusives and like getting to a story first? Like, is that something that you feel pressure from the organization to do that kind of thing? I'm just curious, because that tends to be kind of the archetype of the journalist looking to break the story. And I was curious if that was something you felt in your role.
Yeah, I mean, they like to have exclusives, you know, I mean, that's, we want to give our readers something they can't find anywhere else. You know, that's why people pay for a subscription, is because this is information that, you know, we are surfacing, it's analysis that we've got. So yeah, definitely. We do have that. And which is, again, like all part of the relationship building and stuff like that. So.
Well, and maybe for the just simplifying, maybe describe what exclusive means to you and the PBJ.
Which would be this, we've got the story. So like,
first, before anybody else.
Yeah. So we've got the story, you know, you've got some big deal that you're doing or whatever, and we'll I know with like fundraising and stuff, a lot of times, I read the SEC documents. It's super fun.
Yep. Oh yeah.
So,
Form B. Ah, yes.
We
Nice.
surface information, and I'll call people up, and we'll write a story, and a lot of times we're the only ones that have it, and so that that would be a breaking exclusive thing that we've got, or if a company is going to be making a big announcement and they want to give us the story first.
Yep.
We like that, and so we would run it, and then other people could then write it. So it happens all the time with like embargoed news and things like that. If they give us the embargoed exclusive, that's cool. That's even better.
Okay.
And so,
and explain embargo for people who might not know that term.
It's something that tech companies love, and so basically, they've got news that they want to give out, and so they'll go to all of the reporters and be like, we've got embargoed news. If you agree to this, we'll give you the information early so that you can read it, set up interviews, understand what's happening, and then everybody's allowed to publish the story at the same time on a specified date and time. If you do embargoes and people agree to it and you've given it to multiple people, this has happened before and this is terrible. This will get you on the worst list. If you are giving out embargoed information, you give it to everyone or you only give it to one person. Like you can't give everybody embargoed information with different embargo times, because as soon as somebody else hits publish on something you have embargoed, all bets are off. And so, and you've probably made a lot of people angry. So if you're going to embargo, everybody gets the same time, or you only give one person the information under embargo and everybody else gets it at the same time at like 9 a.m. as a PR news release or whatever.
Yeah, and when I worked on the startup side of the desk, I was often in marketing and public relations. And back in the old days, before all this wacky internet web stuff, like embargoing used to be a way of controlling the message. And so I was just curious, like in this day and age, is it still an effective means of working with media?
I mean, we do honor embargoes. I know there's some people in town that will willy-nilly break them. And so we won't knowingly break it ahead of time. Sometimes
that's why I only work in a single time zone, because then I don't have to worry about embargo times.
Right,
when you got like the East Coast thing, that gets really confusing.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we'll deal with embargoes. I'd rather not, but tech companies love it, so I feel like I deal with it the most in our newsroom. I think it's the control thing.
Yeah, I mean, they founders want control of what's going on with their company. Perfect. Like Stephen Green, always the one with the random question. Favorite Hawaiian island and why?
Oh, favorite. Let's see. I'd probably go with Oahu just because that's where all my family is. So that's the one I go to the most. I've actually, I've only been to two. I've only been to Oahu and the Big Island, which is where I have family. So, because if I'm going to go to Hawaii, I go where the family is, not the other islands where I don't have the family. So,
interesting.
Yeah. I guess I'd have to say maybe the Big Island as well, because that's where our family came from originally, so that's where the ancient family land is. But I finally got to visit a couple years ago, so that was cool. But Oahu is where I've spent most of my time.
Okay, cool. Yeah, random fact, Stephen Green and I had no idea we were on Kauai at the same time and ran into one another in a parking lot. So random serendipity thing there. So that's
nice. Well, this year I was supposed to be visiting family at the end of March. I was actually going to miss TechFest for the first time because I was going to be out of town visiting family. But we had to cancel that. So that was a super bummer.
But sorry about that.
Yeah. But it was also turned out that there was like 2 or 3 other people in Portland startup world that were also going to be in Hawaii around that time. And I was like, that's just weird.
Yeah. There's some weird Portland to Hawaii connections in interesting ways. This is one that I think would be super valuable to folks. Do business journals collaborate or share regional national stories among respective local markets? And any thoughts about how to more effectively access that broader business journal network?
That's actually a really great question. So each of our papers is pretty independent. Us in Seattle have a pretty good back and forth, like when stories work for both of our markets. Our healthcare reporter has a newsletter that goes out Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it's actually a collaboration between us and Seattle. And so so they're talking all the time, and we kind of see all their stuff, and we will pick up their stories. I've also been working pretty closely with the managing editor and one of the tech reporters in our San Jose paper for Intel coverage, because that's such an interesting company for us because they have big operations in multiple of our cities, and so I tend to take a little bit of a lead on it, just because it's such a big piece of our economy here, and there are so many people. I mean, there's more people here than there is down in the Bay Area, and so they get better access sometimes to executives. So if they get a big executive interview or something like that, we'll pick up their story. But like, I'm usually the one writing the earnings stories or a lot of some of the bread and butter stuff. And so they'll pick up my stuff. I know, and I think it's just being tested in a few markets, but I know there is some sort of a like subscription plus thing that we're finally getting to. Because I know a bunch of us have been asking for some kind of thing where if you have a subscription to like the Portland Business Journal, can you access stories from other business journals? Like, because you're probably interested in what's happening in Seattle or San Francisco, or Austin. And that hasn't been something that you could do in the past, but they are slowly rolling out some sort of a subscription plus thing where you could get access to other cities, which I think is a really interesting product for us, because we have business reporters in 43 cities. Like, no other business publication has that. Like, we have on the ground local knowledge, all these places. Like, the Wall Street Journal doesn't have that. And so I think we're trying as a company to figure that out a little bit better. But I know, like, I get pitches sometimes for things that is very clearly something they should be pitching to our Silicon Valley or our Seattle paper, because like the company's based there and it's maybe tangentially something Portland would be interested in. And so I'll tell them, I'll be like, look, you should pitch this story to one of these papers. And then if they do anything, we'll pick it up. I know we've done that with a few things. So I try and send people to the right person, but then on the flip side, then it's up to those other papers, how responsive they are. So.
Yep. That makes sense. Okay, this hour has completely flown by. We could probably go another hour easily. Really appreciate you spending the time answering these questions for folks. This is the time where we kind of like to turn it around and say, given that you are so willing to spend time with us, what can the community be doing to help you? How can we be most helpful right now?
Let's see. Well, I do have a newsletter, TechFlash, that goes out on Mondays and Wednesdays. You should definitely sign up for it. Also, especially in this day and age, subscribe to a newspaper, my newspaper, other newspapers. Local news is super important, and it's really important right now. And I know I get a lot of flack for things being behind a paywall, but we're a business. I mentioned earlier, I have a mountain of student debt I got to pay. I got rent. I got all of that stuff. And so that helps support my paycheck. So, the information is valuable, I think, that we're offering. And so that's my plug for subscribe to a newspaper. Some media that you are using and you are finding value in, you should subscribe.
Totally agree. Yep. And Pi is a proud subscriber of the Portland Business Journal. So thank you for doing the work that you do. Cool. Well, if you're up for it, we may call you back in to do another
Totally.
round of questions sometime soon.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you spending the time. And thank you so much for those insights into the work you do and how people can better collaborate with you. So we're
Definitely.
going to wrap it up here. Tomorrow at 1:00, if you are a startup dealing with remote onboarding of employees or any other company dealing with remote onboarding of employees. We'll have Kristen Gallagher from Edify chatting with us about the best way to work through that. And then next week, we're still lining up a bunch of guests, but yours truly, I'll be here to answer your questions on Tuesday. So if you want to dial into that, that one's always fun because it's just me talking at a camera, which is completely awkward and weird. So you can tune in for that. You can just mute it and just watch my face. It's entertaining in that way. So thank you so much, Malia. Always good to see you. Great to see your face and hang out with you. And we will talk to all of you soon. Have a good evening. See you later.
Bye.